Our next presenter is Larry Scofield. Our next presentation is the EDC4 peer exchanges, report of findings, lessons learned, common issues. Unfortunately, Larry Galehouse was going to co-present, but he cannot be here today, so please welcome Larry Scofield.
Okay, so just so everybody knows, Larry was going to do this himself because I bailed on him. And so he paid me back by bailing on me. And so the way I like to think of it, Gary Hicks was the improved version of Larry Galehouse, and I'm the beat-up version of Larry Galehouse. So I can say whatever I want, and he's in big trouble for it. So what I'm going to talk to you about is a peer exchange that was an FHWA-sponsored project. How many people here came to John's peer exchange? There's probably 6 or 7 or 8 in here. So if you got any comments in the end, don't be bashful. Everything's fair territory. We're just trying to see a good way to do it. This peer exchange was part of the FHWA Everyday Counts 4 program on the how. And Jason, you had the when and where, right? So we had 3 parts. This is only the 1 part. So the way this worked out is the FHWA hired the CP Tech Center for the contract. They then sub part of it to the Pavement Preservation Center and on the asphalt side and the concrete side to the American Concrete Pavement Association that IGGA is affiliated with. So that's how Larry and I got involved in this. When it started out, the FHWA sponsor, or what you'd call contract officer, was James Gray. And as the project took off, we got into it, and then there was a switch to Antonio Nueves because James transferred to a different position. Just giving you a little bit of background, the way this was set up originally was to have an expert state and an explorer state. So if you look at those little mannequins right there, just think of the big red one as the heavyweight champ, and then the little blue ones as the 90-pound weaklings, okay? So the idea was to find 10 different heavyweight champs and then take 2 90-pound weaklings from each of the states and have them train them so they would become the heavyweight champions to go back home. So that was the original concept. So as we got into this, there was some issues with that. And what had originally happened is the FHWA, as part of the Everyday Counts program, had actually done a survey to establish who the expert states were and who are the 90-pound weaklings. How many 90-pound weaklings are in the audience, by the way? Okay, how many experts are in the audience right now? Just so you know, this is the issue we had with the survey. So when the FHWA got their survey, they looked at it and says, some of what we would consider an expert state were showing themselves as an explorer state. And we knew better. But then the other question is, are you a heavyweight in every treatment, or are you only heavyweight in one treatment? So as we got into this, it got a little more difficult. But the good news was part of the task was actually to survey the states and ask those questions. And you can see Larry's joke on there. You can tell Larry's been around a long time, my other brother Larry, and that's what we like about surveys. And so we used the partnerships, and you can see the number of states in each of that's a little box up there and which states responded. So essentially all 50 states were polled. There was local agencies also polled. So another issue here in the original concept was it was to include local governments as well as state agencies. Well, if you go talk to a local government, a lot of them really don't care what the state agencies do, and if you talk to state agencies, a lot of them don't want to do anything the local governments do. So we figure, well, this is going to be really interesting if we got a heavyweight who's a local government and the explorers. So all these little factors come into play here. So I'm walking you through the 4 different regional meetings, and that's what was done. The other thing that was done at that time, well, let me go over this. So here's the different treatments that were polled, okay? So remember, the higher the number, the stronger 90-pound weakling you are. So if there's a 10 or 11 up there, that means you really need to work out. If it's a 0 or 1, it says you're an expert, you're the heavyweight. So as you go across the different treatments, you know, some of this was a surprise to me. Like, I'm from Arizona, an asphalt rubber state, but you can see that was one of the ones where everyone wanted to be an explorer state. Cape seals, chip seals, except for one region, pretty much everybody seemed to feel good. Cold in place recycling, you had two regions that said, you know, we need help. Crack filling, you know, pretty standard, I think. Same way with crack sealing. Flush seals, again, that was a surprise to me, but you can see everyone says we need help on that. And fog seals right up there with it. And moving on down to treatments, you know, the hot in place recycling, and the warm mix and the hot mix overlays, you can say people pretty comfortable, in the same way with the patching. Microsurfacing is there kind of in the middle. Mill and hot overlay, again, was pretty comfortable. Open graded friction course, ultra thin bonded wearing course, and profile milling, again, for me, was a bit of a surprise because they were indicating they needed help on that. So that was the easy side. Who needs help? The expert side wasn't much better. Because like I said, neither of these two surveys that were done even came close to matching each other. Our own experience so you got Rejuvenators. Again, there was a lot of need on Rejuvenators, sand seals, scrub seals, slurry seals, and ultra thin. And then we're going to get into the concrete ones on this side. So crack sealing it's moderate, but that was kind of a surprise to me. Cross stitching isn't commonly done by a lot of the states, so that really wasn't much of a surprise. Diamond grinding is probably the most prolific pavement preservation treatment, so that wasn't a surprise. Dowel Bar Retrofit isn't done a lot so much anymore, so that one wasn't. Full depth repair and joint sealing, and the rest of them are kind of in the middle. And a lot of these states don't do a lot of that. Slab stabilization is done even less. It's usually associated with structures. And then on the spall repair. So you can see where everyone was saying where they were at. So then it says, okay, we've got two surveys. They don't match each other, and we don't think either one of them represents who the experts are and who the explorers are. And quite frankly, within any one state, it's really not the state that's the expert. It might be 1 or 10 or 5 people. But once you move away from them, their own state may have a lot of people that we'd call explorers. And so we said, okay, let's come up with a different approach, and the FHWA allowed that. And so what we decided to do was go ahead and host regional workshops, and those were tied onto the partnership meetings. We had a half day before or after, and at that time there was people come in and talk about selected treatments. Hopefully many of you did some of that, and at that same time, Larry had a little survey in real time about what treatments would you like to see done in the peer exchanges. So that way the customers could choose what they want. And the other one was, instead of having a peer exchange where you had a heavyweight and 2 90-pound weaklings, let's just invite states together as equals, including the agencies, and then they could just have an exchange among themselves, and people could all share their experiences. And so that's what we ended up doing, and we'll go over that. Here's the different regional workshops. The way I think we did them, if my memory's correct, we started out in Mystic, Connecticut. We went to Biloxi, Mississippi, then Madison, Wisconsin, and Portland, Oregon. And the little red stars are showing you where the workshop was at. We also did the NACE event. We did a workshop there for the local people. That's not on here, but we also did that. So to give you some idea what came out of all this, remember I said Larry did the survey to ask him what topics would you want to discuss in peer exchanges, and it typically came out about 9 to 11 different topics. It varies a little bit, but again, there's a certain kit that almost everybody uses, I think. So I'll let you look through some of them, and I'll try and point out some differences. But, you'll see in some of these things, it got into training, it got into quality assurance, which you might be able to argue that's not necessarily how, but what we did was what did they want to talk about. So that's how this has been set up. This is all the different regions. This is a Midwestern right here. You can take a look at it real quick. Northwest Regional Workshop. Again, you're going to see very similar treatments among most of them. And sometimes it wasn't even clear to me on the subjects. There was just regional differences in what people said, like thin overlay or ultra thin. When I was listening to some of the people talking, it wasn't always that different that I could see. Okay, the goal of it, as I mentioned, was actually to get everybody talking. What are your issues? What training needs you have? What are your construction spec problems? Didn't matter if you were local or a state agency. It was just one-on-one with a bunch of people. And what are the lessons learned? What are the things you want to tell everybody to never make that mistake again? Again, the idea is increase the tools in the toolbox. So if you look at this map, okay, if you look at these stars, so that's Phoenix, Arizona, where one of them was held. So all the states that same color, those are the participating states. So you'll have 10 yellow stars. Those are the host states. So you can see as you went around what was covered and what wasn't. The gray is the states that weren't done. We tried really, really hard for the whole period to go to Hawaii, but, you know, Jason just wouldn't allow that to happen. He kept calling Antonio and saying, don't let them go there. They never come back. But you can see we reached 37 states, so, you know, I think that was an improvement. What you're looking at here, this is the map of the region, the location of the peer exchange, the date, and the participants. So I'll run you through all 10 of these, and the one thing to notice down there on the bottom is Bismarck, North Dakota. One of the do-overs, if anyone ever does this, what we probably didn't do as well as we should have is engaging the local division offices and the LTAP centers. The ones that happened well are the bigger ones, and you'll be able to see that. In the room itself, we probably had 15 people maybe. So all that 110 in North Dakota was actually on their remote television. And to take notes on people sometimes you can't see and sometimes almost can't hear was really tough, but they really got a lot of people involved in it. So I'd encourage that again. Like I said, I think that was one of the weaknesses we had. Here's some of the other ones. You know, Minnesota was a big one. We worked with the Minroads folks on that. Baton Rouge, I think, is actually more than that. I think the 26 participants were in the room. They also did teleconferencing, and they had a number of people out there. We just couldn't get a good head count on that. So you can see the rest of them. We ended up in Macon, Georgia for the last one. The other thing I'll point out, Phoenix, Arizona, we also scheduled for each of these was a day and a half peer exchange, okay? So the second half of the second day in Phoenix, Craftco volunteered because they have their equipment facility there, and they actually did demonstrations. So anybody who was interested could then go out and see the demonstrations and then get on the planes and go home. So that one was a little bit different. Again, that's another improvement we could have made. So here's going to be some of the painful part. This is a list of the takeaways on each of the different treatments. So if you see up here at the top, you can see it's the asphalt rubber treatment and what it was shown to be predominantly New England and the Southwest. And that was kind of, again, I come from Arizona. So I'm more used to it than probably many, and that was somewhat of a surprise. Binder, you heard Kevin talk about terminal blend or the wet process. Both of them seem to be used. In New England, they used a PG 5828 with 15 to 20% tire rubber, and then the 30 mesh is sprayed at 0.5 to 0.6 gallons a square yard, depending on the pavement type. And you heard that on the Arizona was fairly close to that. And one of the others, surface preparation is critical for a successful asphalt rubber chip seal, just as it is any of the others. And it wasn't untypical to mill off the pavement markings to prevent aggregate loss. Cold weather, again, this is just showing you some of the criteria that people are doing. Obviously, you know, roller speed is important. That came out in all of them. I don't think you're going to see that in all of them, but that was in all of them. And what they're looking at is 8 to 10 year life extension is possible with the asphalt rubber chip seal. And Massachusetts primarily uses a SAMI interlayer for placing thin overlays, and that was a surprise to me also. Cape seals generally placed on higher volume roads. Depending on weather conditions, the chip seals need to cure for 2 to 14 days prior to placing the micro on top of it. Cape seals are selected mainly for visual and political reasons. I know I probably shouldn't be saying that, but that's what we heard. They perform better than chip seals and thin overlays in most locations. So if you're one of the people who doesn't like some of the responses, understand these sometimes are individual state responses. And I'm sure in the same state we could get other people who don't agree with that. So these are just comments. Don't take them, you know, hopefully they're beneficial, but just like Kentucky found Cape Seal performance is better than standard 1.5" mill and fill. So I'm sure I can find people in Kentucky who don't believe that. Chip seals, most states use polymer emulsion, and that was really, really common. Same way on the fog seals. The other comment was there was a number of states that go over 10,000 ADT. You know, that was one of the big EDC things, that let's do it in high volume roadways, and it seems like that's been going on. Most states sweep a chip seal as soon as possible after construction. That was one of the ones that varied quite a bit among states. I can tell you that from next day, that was really a surprise from 4 hours, and that also got into what binders they were using. Agencies are interested in fractionated wrap and chip seals. New Mexico is using 100% of it. Hopefully that's still true. He was at our meeting. If I say something's wrong, please correct me. That's the whole idea on all this stuff. West Virginia requires equipment calibration on every project. That was one of the other things I can tell you that wasn't standard across the the different ones. Snowplow damage is a factor when drivers not trained. Particular plow blades actually are better than others, so that was the other thing, one of the other things that came out of that. Louisiana requires a pavement moisture check prior to placement, and Minnesota had an incentive-disincentive to get rid of the 200s issue. Biggest issue on chip seals that I remember is the states having too many fines. And some places, they would wash it at the plant. By the time it got to the project, it would already be out of spec. So it's easy when you got good aggregate to say, 1% is great, but that wasn't possible every place. And then the other thing, point out, Montana chip seals right after construction because they believe that's the time to do it. So that's why that's in there. Cold in place recycling. If you remember, that was one of the ones where a lot of people thought they needed help. So they're looking at 3 to 4 inches of removal, but they're also saying you got to have a minimum of 3 inches of existing so you don't break through the base. And this came up several different times. Good specification, mix designs are critical for success. I'd also say construction inspection is right up there with it because a number of the problems that were discussed were construction issues. It's dependent upon weather and needs to be dry conditions. If recycling to a depth of 4 inches, 2 lefts are needed for better compaction. That's in the replacement side of it. And they're allowing 3 to 14 days for the moisture to cure out on these things before new surface is placed on tops. And most states cover the cold in place with a 2-inch hot mix overlay. That was pretty typical also. Concrete joint sealing, as you can tell when you look in the Northeast, they don't have concrete up there, so most of those discussions were fairly short. Or joint sealing, excuse me, after initial construction joint sealing, few DOTs reseal the joints. So as much as they talk about preservation concrete, the actual execution is far less. So they openly talked about that, so there was good conversations on it. So crack sealing itself, most states only blow out the cracks and apply the sealant. Only a few states actually route. And again, that was somewhat of a surprise for me. I probably should have known that, but I thought more routed than they did. When you get cracks to 3/4 1 inch, they don't do that. And just the caveat to that, mastics is starting to fill that void a little bit, and there's one of those in there also. Crack sealing is not done on pavements having issues with stripping. So that was recognized, and it's also best to schedule the crack sealing at least 6 months prior to paving, and that's so you don't get the bumps in the overlays as you do them. Some DOTs use a mastic to fill the open longitudinal joints or the really wide cracks that were mentioned earlier. And as you can see in the bottom one, it's becoming more and more of a common product. Diamond grinding, that, like I said, that's probably for concrete, the most ubiquitous material, and you can see it's been used to do friction. If you're in Oregon or Washington, it's used to do studded tire removal, so thank you for having studded tires. We wish you wouldn't either, just so you know. It's one of the hardest things in the world to grind. Minnesota has 2 smoothness specs, urban and rural, so be aware of that. And one of the tech stop was there, and they, just so you know, if you're aware of the next generation concrete service, Houston, Texas is the world's leader. They probably have 4 million square yards of it. And that's probably more than the rest of the world. So they went nuts on it. And slurry disposal for diamond grinding is where you can get into trouble. So Dowel Bar Retrofit, again, this isn't commonly done by a lot of the states. Typically have to have 8 inches or more. Some DOTs, in fact, let me add another bullet here because Kim's sitting there. If anybody needs to know anything about Dowel Bar Retrofit, the state of Washington has the best documents in this country. And so when I say if you've got a longitudinal crack going where a Dowel Bar Retrofit's going to go, skip it. They're the ones who figured that out. So just so you know, and most DOTs use, this should say 3.5 inch dowel bars in each wheel path, not just the outer. Some states do outers, but most do both. Inspection is necessary to check the alignment of slots and dowel bars. It's not like a paver where you're sticking them in there blind and you're hoping they're aligned. You can see everything on Dowel Bar Retrofit. So if you're messing that up, somebody's not paying attention. So fog seals, most agencies require the manufacturer to dilute the asphalt emulsion as opposed to blending it out on the construction project where you mess everything up. DOTs require fog sealing the rumble strips after construction. Arizona doesn't do that. Do they, Kevin? I saw you sleeping, so that's why I'm picking on you. Fog sealing rumble strips, because I'm not sure I was at all these, but I don't think most people actually do. So, how many people here fog seal? Okay, I stand corrected. See, I got to learn too. I listened to all this before too. Okay, fog sealing after chip seal promotes a positive public perception. Black pavement is a new pavement, so that's the idea there. A few days after the chip seal is constructed, it's fog sealed with 0.08 to 0.1 gallons per square yard. And are always overlapped on centerline shoulder joints. Full depth repairs getting back into concrete, and typically they'll do a construction project on this, and they'll do both partial and full depth repairs together. Inspection is an issue for DOTs because they don't do much of it. So they're somewhat, in some regions, they're at the mercy of the contractor. And better guidance is needed for selection of dowel bars. And this gets into the coating. There's probably 10 or 15 different types of dowel bar coatings now available. So if you're into that, I know Washington DOT has to deal with a lot of that, but most states are still using the plain Jane version. But several states are using precast panels. Both New Jersey and Indiana use it. In New Jersey, I understood. Indiana, I was kind of surprised. They actually have their own design standards that detail precast. So that they were really into it. That was quite a pleasant surprise. Hot in place recycling, use only companies with well-maintained equipment and experienced operators. And that's code for they'd had problems previously. So finding good candidate projects is challenging. You've heard some of that in some of the presentations today. Better acceptance procedure is needed for the process. DOT personnel are very favorable about the ARA training and field trips. That's probably Larry's code in there. You'll see one more of those in here. Many local agencies are using HRR followed by surface treatment. Microsurfacing, workmanship, and variability between contractors is an issue in many DOTs. You had places of the country where the market wasn't very big and they couldn't even attract any of the specialty contractors. A hot mix contractor would just go in and do some of these things, and that's where some of these comments are coming from. Some state needs more contractors to increase competition. In the northeast part of the United States, you have people who own all the aggregates, so they dictate the prices for the different treatments, which almost controls what treatments can be bid, even when you do alternate bids. Some states are seeing delamination issues with microsurfacing. Iowa DOT specifies 6 to 12% residual asphalt by dry weight of the aggregate. Minnesota DOT increased emulsion application to 13 to 16% for better performance. They probably, and I'll go out on a limb here because I'm not supposed to say best practices, but they probably have one of the better specs if anybody's interested. At least that's my opinion. The DOT required microsurfacing test sections placed at night at least 1 hour after sunset and at least 1 hour before sunrise. And that's to make sure you're getting what you're supposed to be getting, and that's not done because it's convenient. It's not convenient, but that's how you ensure you got the right binder. Montana implemented incentive and disincentive for ride quality, and I think they are probably the only ones. If somebody's here, correct me, but I don't remember that being the case anyplace else. DOT personnel are very favorable about the ISI Slurry Seal Systems Workshop. Partial depth repair, we're back to concrete. It says should go to T/3. That actually should be a maximum of T/3, and CP Tech Center in 2012 came out with a manual that revised what you should do on partial depth repair, and they allow T/2. If you're in the Midwest and have joint-associated distress, I would agree with that, but out west where we have good concrete pavements that last a long time, I would never go T/2. If your patch fails, imagine what's going to happen to the car that drives over it, so that's why you had the T/3 in the old days. So temper all these things that, you know, they're just discussion points. Most DOTs are, and this one's, if what we found is for the when maintenance is doing the patch repair, they're doing the elastomeric products, the Techcretes, the Fibercretes. When they're doing construction, a lot of them are doing the cementitious-based materials. So this one's a little bit off here, but the other thing, remember, if you have, and is Jason, yeah, Jason's over there, he's covered this in his specs. Utah's probably got the best diamond grinding spec for spall repairs when you're using a polymer modified product. It can actually gum up a grinder and make life really ugly. There's probably a 6 or 7 year old lawsuit still going on over that. So that's, all those details have been worked out, and if you got any questions, I'd get a hold of Jason and talk to him. For rejuvenators, need guidance developed to properly evaluate rejuvenators. And the question was there, how do I put it down, but how do I know if it's working? And that's not a trivial question unless you're set up pretty good with a lab situation. Pavement surface on high-speed routes must be retextured before application, and I would temper that the issue is friction management, and you either control it through the use of abrasives or you can do the retexturing. People have successfully used both. Tennessee DOT used a polymerized Rejuvenator over new hot mix longitudinal joints. Scrub seals. Now this is a repeat, so don't let me read that one to you. I didn't realize that when I looked at the slides, but first one is states advise developing criteria for scrub seal pavement selection, avoid pavements with fatigue cracking and roads with steep grades. Now if you look at the very last bullet, it contradicts that, and why that is because different states use them for different treatments, but we'll get to it. Some DOTs are reviewing pavement preparation to determine whether blowing the cracks clean will add to the treatment performance. So in other words, if you're going to do a scrub seal, some states actually go out there with compressed air, blow out the cracks, others just go over it. And the verdict is still out on that one. Tennessee always removes thermoplastic markings before scrub seal placement so they don't lose it on top of it. They suggest waiting 30 days after completion before covering with surface treatment, and then skipping to the last bullet, the scrub seals are sometimes used on severely cracked pavements as a stress-absorbing interlayer prior to microsurfacing. Slurry seals, when I can get my lips to work. Many contractors entering the market without good experience. That's code again for states that have had problems with inexperienced contractors being the low bid and the attendant issues. Best performance occurred when the PCI was 80 or better. Latex modified emulsions used on higher volume roads and streets. More slurry seals are being placed to avoid American disability requirements, and that's because of the thickness. That's another thing the FHWA, if you don't mind me, Jason, can work on over the years. I'm sure you've heard this a million times, but I can show you a picture that's really interesting on ramps, but wheelchair ramps. Used predominantly by cities and counties. When you get into local governments, they seem to be the bigger users of that. Some of them experience problems with forged slurry seal. I probably shouldn't use that word. With slurry seal mixed designs, meaning it even had the same code as the previous job, which the code had to have changed for the current job. So the fact that somebody gives you a cert doesn't mean it's worth more than the paper, so just passing things on. Thin hot mix overlays. Most DOTs limit pavement preservation thickness to 1.5 inches or less. That really derives out of the FHWA many years ago. Thin 4.75 millimeter super pave mixes placed at 90 pounds a square yard are gaining popularity. Alabama uses an open graded friction course placed from 90 to 135 pounds per square yard. Overrolling by the contractor can reduce the open graded friction course ability to drain. I've never seen that. We did a lot of that in Arizona, but you usually start breaking the rocks before that. So, ultra thin bonded wearing course. Rumble strips should be removed prior to their placement. Many agencies require the use of material transfer vehicles. Again, that's a temperature thing and to control the process a little better. DOTs prefer spray pavers with large emulsion tanks to reduce stopping for refilling. There were a number of states that don't have access to spray pavers, and particularly in the Northeast, when the work is going on, there's not enough spray pavers even to meet the demand. So one of the problems they had to wait on projects. They would mill the surface, and it might be 5 or 6 months before they could get back on to do something. Separate pay item for asphalt emulsion is recommended. The spray paver benefits include a stronger bond to the underlying pavement, a barrier against moisture intrusion, and elimination of getting tack on vehicles. Many agencies want spray pavers to be the workhorse of the future. The quality of construction is generally improved, but again, few of them are available. Winter maintenance can be a problem if they're not aware of what happens with open graded textures and de-icing chemicals. So that's something that a number of states getting into that have experienced, but it's all controllable. Now, those were kind of the how on the treatments. Now we're going to get into some of the other ones like training. When we did the first 4 or 5 peer exchanges, it was real clear that within the next 5 years, 30 to 50% of the DOT was going to change. And that's phenomenal. And that's not necessarily just a training issue. That's a whole lot of issues. So that's why this came up. Finding good inspectors. A lot of states are going to consultants, and it works at first because then the DOT people retire and become the consultant inspectors. And now they're losing those people, and now the consultants don't have trained inspectors. So that's some of what was going on. This one, training is attended by managers and not by the project field staff. You know, that's a management issue. Many state personnel want hands-on training with equipment. This came through loud and clear over and over. They don't want pavement management training. They don't want webinars. They want hands-on training. So that's something that came out of these more and more. Work is going to consultants, as I mentioned before. Kentucky actually hired a dedicated chip seal lady, and she was like the chip seal god. Every time they started a chip seal project, she went out, certified the contractor's equipment, argued with them about their spray nozzles and all the calibration, and then made sure the inspectors were doing their job before she left. So that was a real big improvement for them to solve their construction problems. And she was really good. Minnesota, on the other hand, has a knowledge book. How many people have heard of the knowledge book? They have one for asphalt, one for concrete, and they're really, really good. So I would encourage you. I can't tell you they're always going to be out in 6 months. I'm not sure they're even out yet. It's been over 6 months again, but that's what they're trying to do, is get all their corporate knowledge in a PowerPoint. And that's not a trivial thing. And there's a special science to go about how to do that, which they're using. I can't remember what it's called, but organizations like NASA and stuff use it, the information they can't afford to have people can't remember. Quality assurance. Some states do not require a QC plan for pavement preservation contractors. Certification is required for lab and material sampling personnel, and again, I would call that a best practices. Not all states do that. Many states have had bad experiences with warranties. Problem with warranties, there's got to be someone who's willing to enforce it. So if you can't stand the fight, the best advice is not to get in it, because you're going to get a bloody nose no matter what. So need a method to sample microsurfacing during placement. Make sure you know what you have instead of just testing the ingredients. And Kentucky formed an internal agency group named the Preventive Maintenance Alliance that meets twice a year and intends to improve treatment quality. So what this is an industry agency group, and they meet twice a year, go over specifications, field problems, complaints, everything they can to keep tweaking the process to make it as good as they can. Budgeting, some states designate 20 to 30% of total budget to pavement preservation. A lot of states don't track your design and construction administration costs on pavement preservation projects. States only consider using life cycle cost analysis on typically larger construction projects. It hasn't filtered down into the preservation projects. And Washington State, this is another accolade over to them, is converting 3,000 miles of hot mix asphalt roadway to chip seals and achieved $120 million in savings since 2009. I don't want to steal Jason's thunder because I think this is what he's going to talk about, but one of the other aspects of this project was checklists. So the paper checklists are available, and you're going to cover all that, right, Jason? So I'll shut up. The phone ones are in beta testing. Any questions? Well, thank you. Let's see how close.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.